You know, it's a funny thing, the sound of a dream being laughed at. It doesn't always come as a roar. Sometimes it's a quiet, domestic sound. The soft chuckle from the other side of the room, the gentle shake of a head from someone who shares your bed, the sigh that says, "Oh, you and your little ideas." That was the soundtrack to the early years of my marriage. And like any soundtrack that plays long enough in the background, you eventually stop hearing it consciously. It becomes the ambient noise of your existence, the white noise that drowns out the frequency of your own inner voice. His name is Mark, and I loved him. God, how I loved him in those early days. I loved him with the fervent, uncomplicated devotion of someone who believes she has found her person, her port in the storm, her safe place to land after 28 years of feeling like I was always hovering just above solid ground, never quite touching down. I loved the solid, predictable weight of him next to me at night, the way his body created a geography of warmth and security in our bed. I loved how he could fix a leaky faucet with the same focused intensity that other men brought to their hobbies or their work. I'd watch him from the bathroom doorway, his brow furrowed in concentration, his capable hands wielding a wrench like a surgeon's scalpel, and I'd feel this wash of gratitude. Here was a man who could solve problems. Here was a man who understood how things worked, who could take something broken and make it whole again. He could grill a perfect steak, medium, rare, with those beautiful crosshatch marks that looked like they belonged in a magazine. He'd stand at the grill in our small backyard, a beer in one hand and tongs in the other, master of his domain, and I'd bring out the salad and the wine, and we'd eat as the sun set, talking about our days, our future, the house we'd buy, the children we'd have. Those early evenings felt like scenes from a movie about the life I'd always been told I should want. He was an architect, a builder of tangible, physical things that you could see and touch. Skyscrapers of steel and glass that scraped the sky and redrew city skylines. His world was one of blueprints and load, bearing walls of CD programs and building codes, of things that obeyed the immutable laws of physics. There was a rightness to his work, a certainty. A building either stood or it fell. A design either met the specifications or it didn't. Success was measurable, quantifiable, real. My world, the one inside my head, was made of mistier stuff. I had grown up the daughter of 2 public school teachers in a small town in Oregon, where ambition was viewed with suspicion and environmental consciousness was considered hippie nonsense left over from a bygone era. My parents were good people, kind, devoted, perpetually exhausted. They had taught me to be practical, to value security, to understand that dreams were fine as long as they didn't interfere with the serious business of making a living and paying bills. But somewhere in my adolescence, during a high school field trip to the Oregon coast, I had stood on a beach littered with plastic debris bottle caps and shopping bags and fishing nets tangled with kelp, and felt something crack open inside my chest. It was a kind of grief I had no name for, a mourning for something that was dying while everyone around me carried on as if nothing was happening. That day, standing on that ruined beach with the Pacific churning gray and cold before me, I made a promise to myself that felt as solemn as a wedding vow. I would do something. I would matter. I would find a way to help heal this. My goals weren't made of concrete and steel. They were woven from words and ideas and a kind of desperate hope that felt both foolish and essential. I wanted to build ecosystems, not buildings. I had this vision, hazy at first, then gradually crystallizing, for a consulting firm that would help corporations not just be less harmful to the environment, but actually regenerative. A business that would make them partners in healing the planet, not just minimizing their destruction of it. It was an audacious idea, probably a naive one, but it burned in me like a pilot light that never went out, even during my years working soul, crushing jobs that had nothing to do with my purpose. I had moved to Seattle after college, taken a job in the marketing department of a mid-sized insurance company, because it offered health benefits and a 401k and all the other markers of adult responsibility. The work was mind numb in crafting slogans for life insurance policies, analyzing demographic data, attending meetings about meetings. But at night, after my day job in that drab marketing department with its fluorescent lights and gray cubicles and the persistent smell of burnt coffee, I would come alive. I would sit at the small desk in our shared office, really just the second bedroom of our two-bedroom apartment, my laptop humming, filling spreadsheets with market analysis, drafting proposals that felt like manifestos, researching case studies of companies that had dared to do things differently. I read everything I could get my hands on. I devoured books by Paul Hawken and Janine Benyus and Yvonne Chouinard. I took online courses in corporate sustainability and systems thinking and circular economy principles. I joined obscure online forums where environmental professionals shared ideas and frustrations. I built financial models projecting the cost savings of zero-waste manufacturing. I drafted white papers on the competitive advantages of regenerative supply chains. I created mock presentations for hypothetical clients, complete with slide decks and speaker notes. My little desk became mission control for a venture that existed only in my mind, and I was its sole, devoted employee. And Mark would be on the sofa, scrolling through the financial news on his iPad or watching a basketball game, the Warriors or the Blazers, depending on the season. He'd look over at me periodically, my face bathed in the blue light of the screen, my posture hunched with concentration, and he'd smile. It was a fond smile, I'll give him that. There was genuine affection in it, but it was also patronizing in a way I couldn't quite name at the time, couldn't articulate even to myself. "You're still working on your little green project?" He'd ask, his voice laced with that specific brand of affectionate condescension that is perhaps the most insidious form of dismissal. "Come watch this with me. You're burning your eyes out for a fantasy." I'd laugh it off usually. "It's not a fantasy, Mark. It's a business plan. A business plan that requires CEO to grow a conscience." He'd retort, not unkindly. His tone was teasing, the way you might tease a child who insists they're going to be an astronaut. "That's a variable you can't factor into a spreadsheet, Elara. It's adorable, really, your optimism. I love that you care so much, but you can't change human nature." Adorable. That word, more than any other, became the pinprick that slowly deflated me over time. My passion, my late night research, the fire in my belly that kept me awake when I should have been sleeping. It was all categorized as a charming quirk, a hobby, like collecting vintage spoons or learning to play the ukulele. It wasn't real work. It wasn't like his work, which came with pay stubs and professional respect and a tangible impact on a city's skyline that people could point to and say, "He built that." The first time he called it adorable, I felt a small sting that I quickly suppressed. The second time, I noticed the pattern. By the 10th, the 100th time, the word had become a prison bar, one of many slowly constructing a cage around my ambition. There's a profound psychological violence in having your aspirations minimized by the person who is supposed to be your chief supporter, your partner in this journey through life. It's a quiet violence, one that leaves no bruises, but cripples the spirit with surgical precision. You start to doubt not just your goal, but the very faculty within you that conceived it. Is it naive? Is it silly? Am I, fundamentally, a silly person for dreaming this? Am I the deluded protagonist in a story everyone else can see is ridiculous? His laughter wasn't just mockery. It was a tool of definition, a way of drawing boundaries around what was possible and what was fantasy. He was defining my reality, and in his reality, I was a dreamer, not a doer. I was the woman with ideas, not the woman with a business. I was his wife, his companion, the person who made this home feel warm and live, but I was not, could never be, his professional equal. This is the unspoken contract in so many relationships, I think, particularly heterosexual ones, shaped by centuries of cultural programming that we absorb like secondhand smoke, barely noticing until the damage is already done. We agree on roles, consciously or not. The realist and the dreamer, the anchor and the kite, the pragmatist and the idealist, the provider and the nurturer, and the anchor always believes the kite is flighty, unstable, incapable of navigating the real winds of the world. The anchor never considers that it might be the very thing holding the kite down, preventing it from discovering what it could truly become if only it were released. For a while, years actually, I accepted my role. I was the kite. I played the part with increasing skill. I'd talk less about my ideas when Mark was around, learned to read his mood and gauge when my enthusiasm would be welcomed, rarely versus tolerated, usually versus met with irritation increasingly. I'd tuck my notebooks away when he came home from work, minimize my laptop screen if he walked past my desk, trained myself to temper my excitement about a breakthrough in my research or a new concept I'd discovered. I tried to find contentment in the life we were building together, a life that was, on paper, perfectly successful by every conventional metric our culture uses to measure such things. We moved out of our apartment and bought a house, a beautiful craftsman-style home in a tree-lined neighborhood where people walked their golden retrievers and waved to each other from their porches. We had 2 cars, a sensible Subaru for me and a sleek Audi for Mark. We took vacations to all the right places: wine country in California, skiing in Whistler, a resort in Mexico where everything was included and you never had to leave the compound or confront the poverty that surrounded it. We had dinner parties with other couples, Mark's colleagues from his firm and their wives, mostly, since I had gradually lost touch with my own friends, the way one does when a relationship becomes the sun around which your entire existence orbits. We had season tickets to the symphony. We had a retirement plan and life insurance and all the other infrastructure of a successful adult life. It was a beautiful cage, lined with the velvet of comfort and societal approval. But the human spirit, once it has tasted the possibility of its own purpose, is a terrible tenant for a cage. It rattles the bars, it paces, it remembers the sky. The itch wouldn't go away. It would wake me up at 3 a.m., a persistent whisper that grew louder the more I tried to ignore it. This is not all you are. This comfort, this security, this pleasant life, it's not enough. You are meant for something more. You made a promise on that beach, remember? You said you would matter. You said you would help. I'd lie awake in those dark hours, Mark sleeping soundly beside me, and feel a creeping panic that I was running out of time. I was 33, then 34, then 35. The years were slipping past like water through my fingers. My life was passing, and I was spending it making PowerPoints about insurance products and pretending my dreams were just a harmless hobby. During this period, I also started noticing the women around me, the ones who had made different choices. At the grocery store, I'd see women in business suits rushing through during their lunch breaks, phones pressed to their ears, orchestrating complex professional lives. I'd feel a pang of envy so sharp it was almost physical. At the coffee shop, I'd eavesdrop shamelessly on women meeting with clients or colleagues, speaking with authority about budgets and strategies and projects, and I'd feel like I was watching a life I could have had through thick glass. I'd also notice, with growing unease, how Mark spoke about successful women. When a female partner was named at his firm, he'd come home and say things like, "Good for Jennifer, though God knows what her home life must be like. Her kids are probably raised by nannies." When we'd watch the news and see a woman CEO being interviewed, he'd comment, "She seems competent, but there's something cold about her, don't you think, calculating?" The message was clear. Successful women were admirable, perhaps, but also vaguely unnatural, had sacrificed something essential, their warmth, their femininity, their families, on the altar of their ambition. They were exceptions that proved the rule, warnings as much as inspirations. I never challenged these comments directly. I'd not vaguely or changed the subject, but each one landed on me like a stone, adding to a growing pile of evidence that Mark's love for me was conditional on my remaining small, my dreams remaining cute and non-threatening. The turning point was as mundane as the ridicule that preceded it, which is somehow fitting. Life's pivotal moments rarely announce themselves with drama or fanfare. They arrive disguised as ordinary Tuesday afternoons. It was indeed a Tuesday, unseasonably warm for Seattle in November. I was at work, preparing to present a campaign for a new line of paper products our company was launching. The marketing director had assembled a larger group than usual, not just our department, but several executives from the parent company who were visiting for quarterly reviews. I had prepared meticulously, as I always did, even for projects that bored me to tears. The presentation was polished, full of demographic data and market positioning and all the jargon that corporations love. But midway through, while showing a slide about our product's eco-friendly messaging, I made an offhand comment that I immediately regretted. Of course, we should acknowledge the inherent hypocrisy of using virgin forest pulp for paper towels that we're advertising as having eco-absorbency. I said, the words escaping before my internal censor could stop them. We're essentially greenwashing a fundamentally destructive product. If we really wanted to be environmentally responsible, we'd be investing in bamboo or recycled fibers and completely redesigning our supply chain to eliminate waste at every stage. The room went silent. My direct supervisor's face turned an alarming shade of red. I had just criticized our flagship product in front of the parent company executives. My career at this company, I realized, had probably just ended. But then something unexpected happened. A woman in the back of the room, tall, maybe 50, with silver, streaked hair and the kind of posture that announces competence, started laughing, not mockingly, but with genuine delight. Finally, she said, her voice cutting through the awkward silence, someone in this building telling the truth. Her name was Sarah Chen, and she was the Chief Operating Officer of Cascade Technologies, one of the largest tech companies in the Pacific Northwest. She had been invited to this presentation as part of some corporate partnership exploration that I hadn't been important enough to be briefed on. She sought me out afterward while I was in the parking lot, seriously contemplating whether I still had a job to return to tomorrow. She pulled up beside me in a Tesla that probably cost more than I made in 2 years. "Elara Moss," she said, rolling down her window. She had clearly looked up my name. "Do you have 5 minutes?" Those 5 minutes turned into an hour at a coffee shop down the street. Sarah had done her homework, not just looking up my name, but apparently scrolling through my LinkedIn profile, where I had, in a moment of defiance a year earlier, listed my sustainable business consulting concept under projects, even though it existed only in my notebooks and late-night research sessions. "You have a fire in you that this place is trying to put out with bureaucracy and fear," she said, her eyes, dark and intensely focused, locked on mine. "I watched you in that room. You were saying the things that needed to be said, even knowing it could cost you. We need that fire. My company is being crucified in the press for its energy consumption. Our data centers use more electricity than small countries. We're under pressure from investors, from regulators, from our own employees who care about this stuff and are starting to question whether they can ethically work for us." She paused to sip her coffee, never breaking eye contact. "We want to do better. We really do, but we don't know how. The consultants we hire speak in corporate jargon and give us strategies to buy carbon credits, which is just financial penance for sin. It's performative. We need someone who understands that sustainability isn't a department or a PR campaign, it's a fundamental restructuring of how we operate. We need a prophet, not a priest. My heart was hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. What exactly are you offering? I'm offering you a contract to be the external visionary for our new regenerative business division. We're creating a 5-year initiative to completely overhaul our operations. Energy sourcing, supply chain, waste management, product lifecycle, everything. We need someone to lead the strategy who isn't already indoctrinated into corporate thinking, who hasn't been beaten down by years of "that's not how we do things." Someone with genuine passion and legitimate expertise. I don't have a company, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I'm not a consultant. I'm a marketing coordinator at an insurance company who's probably getting fired today. You do have a company, Sarah said firmly. It just hasn't been born yet. Form an LLC, get a lawyer to review the contract I'm going to send you, and we'll begin in January. I'm offering you a 1-year contract to start with options for renewal. $250,000 for the first year, with performance bonuses that could double that if you hit certain milestones. And if this works, if you can help us become the model that other companies follow, you'll be able to write your own ticket. Every corporation in America will want what you have. The sum of money she mentioned was so large it felt fictional. It was more than double Mark's salary, triple even. I remember driving home, my hands shaking so badly on the steering wheel I had to pull over twice. I wasn't just excited. I was terrified in a way I'd never experienced before. This was validation on a scale I had never allowed myself to imagine. It was my fantasy made flesh, solid and tangible and real, and its reality was somehow more frightening than its absence had ever been. This meant I could no longer hide. I could no longer pretend my dreams were just dreams. They were about to become responsibilities, commitments, stakes. I would have to prove I was as competent as Sarah believed I might be. I would have to deliver. And more immediately, more personally. How would I tell Mark? Would he be proud? Would he finally see me as I'd always wanted him to see me, as capable and serious and worthy of respect? Or would he find a way to minimize this to call it a fluke or luck, or somehow diminish this accomplishment the way he had diminished every small step I'd taken toward this goal? The question terrified me because I realized, in that moment, sitting in my car on the side of the road with my hazard lights flashing, that our entire marriage was about to be tested. The foundation we'd built, or that I'd thought we'd built, was about to be subjected to stresses it was never designed to bear. I decided to make it a celebration. If I approached this as a victory for both of us, for our family unit, maybe Mark would receive it that way. Maybe his love for me would override his need to be the primary achiever. Maybe I had been unfair to him, projecting my own insecurities onto him, and he would surprise me with genuine, uncomplicated joy at my success. I stopped at the wine shop and bought a bottle of expensive champagne, the kind we only drank on anniversaries, Veuve Clicquot, in the distinctive orange label that had always seemed like a symbol of celebration, too grand for ordinary life. I went to the gourmet market and bought ingredients for his favorite meal: filet mignon, roasted fingerling potatoes with rosemary, asparagus, and a wedge of the stinky blue cheese he loved. I bought flowers, deep red roses, and placed them in the center of our dining room table. When he walked in the door at 6:30, tired from a site inspection at a high-rise project downtown, his hair still dusty with construction debris, the table was set with our wedding china, the food was warm and waiting, and the champagne was chilling in the ice bucket we'd received as a wedding gift and used maybe 3 times in 6 years. "What's all this?" he asked, a genuine smile breaking across his face, the kind of smile I hadn't seen in months. Did I forget an anniversary? Our anniversary's not until March. No, I said, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought he must be able to hear it. I have news, big news, really big news. He sat down slowly, his expression shifting from surprised pleasure to something more guarded, more careful. I noticed the change but pressed forward, determined to frame this positively. I told him everything. I laid it all out, my voice trembling at first, from excitement, from nerves, from the sheer enormity of what I was sharing, then gaining strength as I saw the shock register on his face. I told him about the presentation, about my impulsive comment that should have gotten me fired, about Sarah Chen and Cascade Technologies. I told him about the contract, the scope of the project, the vision Sarah had for transforming her company into a model of regenerative business practices. And then, because I couldn't not tell him, because the number was so staggering it didn't feel real until I said it aloud, I told him about the money. He was silent for a long time, not just quiet, but completely still, like a man who had just witnessed something impossible and was waiting for reality to reassert itself. He looked from me, to the champagne, to the elaborate meal I'd prepared, and back to me. His expression was unreadable, carefully neutral in a way that made my stomach clench, and then he did the one thing I hadn't prepared for. He didn't laugh, he didn't scoff, he didn't make a dismissive joke. He just deflated. The confident architect, the builder of skyscrapers, the man who had always seemed so solid and certain, seemed to shrink in his chair. His shoulders curved inward. His eyes went distant. "That's incredible, Ilara," he said, but his voice was flat. There was no joy in it, no excitement, no pride. It was the tone you'd use to confirm a distressing weather report or acknowledge that yes, the test results came back positive. "Isn't it?" I said, my enthusiasm starting to waver. "Mark, this is what I've been working toward for years. This is everything I've dreamed of, and it's actually happening. We should celebrate. We should definitely celebrate," he said, but he didn't move to open the champagne. "This is a huge opportunity for you, really huge, for you, not for us." The pronoun choice hung in the air between us like a thundercloud. The celebration dinner was a funeral for the old dynamics of our relationship, though I didn't fully understand that yet. We ate in near silence, the scraping of knives against china abnormally loud. I tried to fill the quiet with details about the project, about Sarah's vision, about the companies we might be able to influence if this pilot program was successful. Mark nodded at appropriate moments, said that's great and good for you, with mechanical regularity, but his eyes never met mine. The champagne tasted sour, or maybe that was just my perception colored by the growing dread in my stomach. That night, lying in bed in the darkness, I finally asked the question I'd been avoiding. "Mark, are you happy for me?" A long pause. "Too long, of course I am," he said. "I'm just processing. It's a lot to take in. Everything's going to change now, isn't it?" "Nothing has to change," I said, though we both knew that was a lie. Everything had already changed. That night was the beginning of the end, though I didn't want to know it yet. I spent the next weeks trying to pretend everything was fine, that Mark's withdrawal was temporary, that once he had time to adjust to this new reality, he'd come around. I told myself he was just tired, just stressed from his own projects, just needing space to process. But deep down, in a place I wasn't ready to examine, I knew. My success was not a shared victory. It was an earthquake. It had shattered the foundation of our relational identity, exposed the fault lines that had always been there but that we'd carefully built our lives around, never addressing them directly. He was no longer the successful husband with the ambitious, but harmless wife. He was the man whose wife's little green project had suddenly become a formidable, lucrative enterprise. My goals were no longer smaller than his, safely contained within the bounds of fantasy. They had eclipsed his. And in the shadow they cast, he was lost. The next months were a study in watching someone you love become a stranger. I threw myself into the work with Cascade Technologies with an intensity that was part passion and part escape. I formed my LLC, Moss Regenerative Consulting, hired a lawyer to review my contract, opened a business bank account, created a website. I rented office space, just a small room in a co-working facility, because working from home had become unbearable. The apartment had taken on the emotional texture of a minefield. The actual work was exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure. I assembled a small team of contractors. A circular economy specialist I'd connected with in one of my online forums. A former EPA policy analyst who had grown disillusioned with government bureaucracy. A data analyst who could model the financial impacts of sustainable infrastructure. Together, we conducted a comprehensive audit of Cascade's operations, identifying waste streams, energy inefficiencies, supply chain vulnerabilities. I presented our findings to Sarah and the board of directors in March. I had prepared obsessively, anticipated every possible question, marshaled my data like a general preparing for battle. I was terrified they would see through me, realize I was just a former marketing coordinator playing dress-up in the costume of a serious consultant. But something remarkable happened when I started speaking. All those years of late-night research, all those notebooks filled with ideas, all that passion I'd kept compressed and contained, it all poured out with a coherence and conviction that surprised even me. I spoke about systems thinking, about biomimicry, about the competitive advantages of regenerative business models. I showed them the numbers, the ROI projections, the case studies of companies that had transformed their operations and emerged stronger, more resilient, more profitable. When I finished, there was silence. Then Sarah started clapping, and the rest of the room joined in. It wasn't polite corporate applause. It was genuine, enthusiastic, the kind of response that says, "You've just changed how we think about this." "This is exactly what we needed," Sarah said. "When can you start implementation?" I wanted to call Mark immediately and share this victory. I wanted to hear pride in his voice, wanted him to say, "I always knew you could do this," even though we both knew that would be a lie. Instead, I called him from my car, my voice bright with forced cheer, and told him the good news. "That's great, honey," he said, his voice distant. I could hear basketball in the background. He was home watching a game. "Listen, I'm on the other line with a contractor. Can we talk about this later?" We didn't talk about it later or ever really. His support became conditional, perfunctory. "That's great, honey," became his default response to any news about my work, delivered in the same tone he might use to acknowledge that I'd bought groceries or gotten the car washed. He stopped asking about my work. He stopped asking about anything. Instead, he started working later, taking on more projects, volunteering for the most demanding assignments at his firm. He'd leave the house at 6:30 a.m. and return at 9:00 or 10:00 at night, claim he'd eaten at the office, and go straight to his computer to work more. On weekends, he'd be at job sites or locked in his home office. He was, in retrospect, doing exactly what I had done for years, pursuing his work with an intensity that was about more than the work itself. He was running, though I don't think he could have articulated what he was running from. We became ships passing in the night, to use a cliché that felt painfully apt. We'd leave notes for each other about whose turn it was to pay the electric bill or that we were out of milk. We'd text about logistics. "What time will you be home? Can you pick up the dry cleaning? Don't forget we have dinner with your parents on Sunday." We operated our household like business partners managing a joint property investment, which is, I suppose, what we had become. The psychological shift in him was fascinating and heartbreaking to witness. His identity had been built, I realized, on being the provider, the achiever, the one who made things happen while I played at my little hobby, in the Western cultural script we had unconsciously adopted, the one written over centuries of patriarchy and traditional gender roles. His masculinity was tied to his professional stature and economic success. My ascent was, in his mind, a relative demotion for him. It wasn't that he was a bad man or a misogynist in any obvious way. He was a man trapped in a story that no longer had a role for him that he understood. My empowerment felt to him like his own disempowerment. It was a zero, some game in his mind, even though I never saw it that way. I would have loved nothing more than to celebrate his successes and have him celebrate mine, to be partners in mutual ambition. But that's not how he experienced it. I found evidence of his distress in small ways. His Amazon history, which he'd always left logged in on our shared iPad, showed a series of self-help book purchases, Reclaiming Your Power, The Superior Man, Iron John, books about masculinity, about finding purpose, about navigating changing gender dynamics. He never mentioned reading them, never left them where I could see them, but I knew he was searching for something, some framework that would help him make sense of what was happening to him, to us. We started fighting, though fighting might be too generous a word. We had cold, philosophical wars waged over the dinner table on the rare occasions when we both made it home in time to eat together. I just don't understand why it has to be so all-consuming, he'd say, his voice carefully controlled. We never see each other anymore. You're always working or traveling to conferences or meeting with clients. This isn't what I signed up for when we got married. You were all consumed when you were building your firm. I'd counter, my voice equally calm but with steel underneath. You worked nights and weekends for 3 years straight. I never complained. I supported you. That was different. He'd insist, his jaw tightening in that way it did when he was trying not to lose his temper. How was it different, Mark? Explain it to me. And he couldn't or wouldn't. The difference was unspoken, cultural, deeply ingrained in both of us at levels we couldn't easily access or articulate. His ambition had been expected, encouraged, seen as a virtue. Mine was an inconvenience, a disruption of the natural order, a violation of the unspoken contract we'd made when we married. That he would be the primary actor in our shared story and I would be the supporting character. The tragedy wasn't in the fights themselves, but in the quiet spaces between them. The silence in our home grew thick and heavy, a third presence in the room, more real than either of us. We were two satellites in the same orbit, slowly drifting apart, pulled by different gravities. The man who had once been my safe harbor, my port in the storm, was now a stranger whose shores I could no longer reach. I tried, in my own ways, to bridge the gap. I'd bring home dinner from his favorite restaurant. I'd suggest a weekend away, just the two of us to reconnect. I'd initiate sex, trying to find in physical intimacy the emotional connection that was fraying. But it all felt performative, like I was playing the role of wife rather than being one. And he responded in kind, going through the motions, saying the right words, but his heart wasn't in it. His heart, I realized, was closed to me now, not out of cruelty, but out of self-protection. The final confrontation happened at a restaurant. That much of my original account was true, though the details were more painful than I initially conveyed. It was October, almost a year since Sarah Chen had offered me that contract that had changed everything. My company was thriving. I had just landed 2 more major clients, both Fortune 500 companies who had seen the Cascade Technologies case study and wanted similar transformations. I had been featured in Forbes, yes, but also in Fast Company and on a PBS special about sustainable business practices. I had given a TEDx talk that had gone modestly viral in environmental circles. I had hired 3 full-time employees and was considering opening a second office. By every external measure, I was succeeding beyond my wildest dreams. By every internal measure, I was watching my marriage die in real time. Mark's firm had also done well that year. They'd won a prestigious award for a mixed-use development project he'd led. It was a genuine achievement, the kind of recognition that should have been cause for celebration. But when I'd tried to organize a party to celebrate, he'd waved it off. It's not a big deal. He'd said, it is a big deal. I'd insisted, you worked so hard on that project. Not as hard as you work on yours. He'd replied, and there was such bitterness in his voice that I'd stepped back as if he'd struck me. That's when I suggested the dinner. A nice dinner, just the two of us, at the upscale seafood restaurant downtown where we'd gone on our first anniversary. A place with memories, with history, with meaning. Maybe, I thought with desperate optimism, we could find each other again in a place where we'd once been happy. We both dressed up, playing the parts of a successful, happy couple. I wore a black dress he'd once said he loved. He wore the charcoal suit I'd bought him for his birthday. We looked, I'm sure, like the kind of couple other people envy. Attractive, successful, put together. A glossy photograph of a perfect life. But photographs don't capture the truth of things. They don't capture the tension that hummed between us like a hive. Voltage wire. We made small talk over appetizers. The weather, the renovation happening in our neighborhood. Neutral topics, safe terrain. We were both so careful, so polite. Like diplomats from warring nations trying to negotiate a peace we both knew was impossible. He ordered whiskey, one glass, then another, then a third. I stuck with water, feeling a need to stay clear. Headed, though for what, I couldn't have said. It was during the main course I'd ordered the Halley, but he'd ordered the ribeye. That he finally said what he'd come there to say. I saw the feature on you in Forbes Online today. He said, not looking at me, but swirling the amber liquid in his glass with focused intensity. Ilara Moss is revolutionizing corporate ethics. Very impressive indeed. Thank you. I said carefully, hearing the edge in his voice, waiting for what I knew was coming. My partner at the firm saw it too. Sent it to the whole group chat with a laughing emoji and a comment. Your wife's more successful than you are, bro. There it was. The wound exposed, that's a shitty thing for him to say. I replied, meaning it, and also completely meaningless. Success isn't a competition between married people. He finally looked at me, and his eyes were filled with a raw, unvarnished pain that made my heart contract. Isn't it, though? He said quietly. That's what it feels like we're competing and I'm losing, like everyone's watching and laughing at me, the architect whose wife outturned him, the man who used to humor his wife's little hobby and now has to watch her on television talking about saving the planet while I'm still just drawing buildings. I repeated, Mark, you create structures that house thousands of people. You shape skylines. Your work matters. Not like yours does, apparently. He drank the rest of his whiskey in one swallow, signaled the waiter for another. You know what it's like to have spent years being patronizing about your dreams, and then have those dreams become more real, more successful, more important than anything I've done. Do you know how that feels? I think I do, I said softly. Because that's what it felt like for years, listening to you call my work adorable, listening to you laugh at my ambitions, being told I was naive, that I was wasting my time, that CEO don't grow consciences. He flinched as if I'd slapped him. I was trying to protect you. I didn't want you to be disappointed when it didn't work out. No, I said, and I felt something hard and clear settle in my chest, a certainty I hadn't allowed myself until this moment. You were trying to keep me small because my smallness made you feel big. You were comfortable when I was the dreamer and you were the realist, when I was the wife and you were the achiever. You didn't marry a partner. You married an audience. That's not fair, he said, but his voice was weak. Maybe not. Maybe I'm being cruel. But Mark, I can't keep apologizing for succeeding. I can't keep making myself smaller to make you feel bigger. I can't live my life trying to manage your ego. We sat in silence for a long moment. The restaurant hummed with conversation around us, the soundtrack of other people's lives, other people's relationships that maybe weren't crumbling like ours. I don't know if I can do this, he said finally. Be married to you, this version of you. And there it was, the truth, spoken plainly at last. I know, I said, and I felt tears sliding down my cheeks, hot and unexpected. I don't think I can do this either. Be married to someone who needs me to stay small to love me. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw his own tears. A single, perfect tear escaped his eye and traced a path down his cheek. It was the first tear I had ever seen him shed. It was for the death of our marriage, for the world he had lost, for the man he could no longer be in the face of the woman I had become. When did we become people who couldn't love each other? He asked, his voice breaking. I don't think we stopped loving each other. I said, I think we just loved versions of each other that don't exist anymore, or maybe never existed. Maybe we loved projections, stories we told ourselves about who we were together. We didn't eat the rest of our expensive meal. We paid the bill and drove home in separate cars. He'd driven himself, arrived separately, which should have told me something about his intentions for the evening. We divorced amicably as such a thing can be, which is to say we didn't scream at each other or fight over possessions. But the process was still a kind of death, still a profound grief that had to be moved through like walking through deep water. There was no screaming, no throwing of dishes, no dramatic betrayals. Just lawyers and mediators and the slow, bureaucratic process of untangling two lives that had been woven together for nearly 8 years. We divided our assets fairly. He kept the house, he'd always loved it more than I did, and besides I needed something smaller, simpler, less full of ghosts. I kept my business, which was, after all, solely mine. We had no children, which made things easier legally but somehow harder emotionally. There was nothing to hold us together, no reason to maintain contact. The day our divorce was finalized, I went home to my new apartment, a loft in a converted warehouse building with high ceilings and large windows that looked out over the city. And I sat on my bed and cried for 3 hours straight. I cried for the marriage. I cried for the man I had loved. I cried for the woman I had been who had believed she could have both the dream and the dreamer's approval. I cried for all the small deaths that had led to this final one. But when the crying was done, when I had emptied myself of grief, I felt something else. Not happiness, not exactly, but a clarity, a spaciousness. The apartment was quiet, but it was my quiet. The silence wasn't heavy, it was full of potential. It was my silence. So here I am now, a year after the divorce was finalized, sitting on the edge of my bed in an apartment I bought with money I earned from my own mind, my own conviction, my own late night work sessions that were once called adorable, but are now called visionary. My company now has 12 employees. We've worked with 7 major corporations to overhaul their operations. We've prevented an estimated 45 million pounds of waste from entering landfills. We've helped 3 companies achieve carbon negative status. We've influenced policy at the state level. I've been invited to speak at conferences around the world. I've been offered a book deal to write about regenerative business practices. I make more money than I ever imagined possible. I own my own apartment. I have autonomy over every aspect of my life. I wake up every morning excited about my work. I've built the thing I dreamed of on that beach in Oregon when I was 17 years old and making promises to the ocean. And yet, in quiet moments, I still think about Mark. Not with regret exactly, but with a complicated sadness. I saw a picture of him on social media recently. He'd been tagged in a post by his firm about a new project. He looked happy, or at least content. He was seeing someone I'd heard through mutual acquaintances. A kindergarten teacher. Someone whose ambitions presumably wouldn't threaten his. I hope he's happy. I genuinely do. I don't wish him ill. I just wish he had been capable of being happy for me, with me. I've also begun to understand my own complicity in the failure of our marriage. I spent years trying to fit into his story, trying to be the version of myself he could love, rather than insisting from the beginning on being fully seen. I enabled the dynamic by accepting his diminishment of my dreams, by laughing along with his mockery, by not demanding the respect I deserved. There's a lesson in that, one I'm still learning. We teach people how to treat us, and I had taught Mark that my dreams were negotiable, that his comfort was more important than my growth. I'm dating now, cautiously. I've had a few relationships over the past year, nothing serious. I'm learning what I need, what I won't compromise on. I'm learning to choose men who celebrate my success rather than feel threatened by it. It's harder than you'd think. The cultural programming runs deep, even in progressive Seattle, even among men who consider themselves feminists. On a date last month, a man, intelligent, successful in his own right, genuinely kind, said to me over drinks, "You must have to work really hard to make time for a relationship with how busy you are." It was a simple comment, probably well-intentioned. But I heard the subtext, "Your work is the problem, your ambition is the obstacle, you need to make time for me by taking it from your work." I didn't see him again. They tell you to find a partner who supports your dreams. It's relationship advice 101, repeated in self-help books and therapy sessions and wedding toasts. But I've learned that the most important partner you'll ever have is the one you wake up with every morning inside your own mind. That partnership must be ironclad. You must learn to be your own most fervent believer, because the world, and sometimes even the people who claim to love you most, will often offer only laughter or, worse, tolerance. You must build your sense of self on bedrock, not on the shifting sands of someone else's approval. I've also learned that women are taught to apologize for their ambition in ways men never are. We're taught to hedge, to soften, to make ourselves smaller so others can feel bigger. We're taught that our success should be grateful rather than confident, that we should credit luck rather than skill, that we should be endlessly accommodating of the egos of the men in our lives. I'm done with that. I will not apologize for wanting things. I will not minimize my achievements. I will not make myself small to fit into someone else's story. My story is tragic because a love I cherished died. It died not from malice or cruelty, but from a failure of imagination. It died because one person's growth became another person's diminishment in a story we were both too blind, too indoctrinated by our culture's scripts, to rewrite in time. Mark and I could have been different if we had been braver, more honest, more willing to examine the unspoken assumptions we'd built our relationship on. Maybe we could have grown together instead of apart. Maybe he could have done the psychological work necessary to disentangle his identity from patriarchal definitions of masculinity and success. Maybe I could have demanded respect from the beginning rather than waiting until I'd earned enough external validation that his opinion no longer mattered. But we didn't, and so we ended. But my story is also empowering because in those ashes, in that painful dissolution of everything I'd thought my life would be, I found a terrifying and beautiful truth. You must be willing to lose the world you have to gain the world you are meant for. This is the great paradox of growth. To become who you're meant to be, you often have to leave behind who you were. And that includes leaving behind the people who loved that old version, but can't or won't love the new one. It's a kind of death, but it's also a kind of birth. I think about that beach in Oregon sometimes, the one where I made my promise to the ocean. I've gone back a few times over the years. It's cleaner now, not clean, but better. There are fewer bottle caps, fewer plastic bags, small victories, incremental change. That's what healing the planet looks like, I've learned. Not grand gestures or heroic moments, but steady, unglamorous work. Small victories that compound over time. That's what healing yourself looks like too. Your ambition is not a whisper for someone else to hear. It is the bone, deep truth of your own becoming. It is the promise you made to yourself, to the universe, to whatever version of yourself you were always meant to grow into. Honor it, feed it, protect it fiercely, even if you have to honor it alone. Especially if you have to honor it alone. Because in the end, the only person who will be with you for your entire life, from your first breath to your last, is you. The only person whose approval you truly need is the one looking back at you in the mirror. Build your life for her. Chase your dreams for her. Become powerful for her. And if someone, a spouse, a family member, a friend, cannot celebrate your becoming if your growth makes them feel diminished rather than inspired, then as painful as it is, you must let them go. Not with cruelty, not with bitterness, but with the sad, clear understanding that you are on a path they cannot walk with you, and staying will only lead to resentment on both sides. I am sitting here now in my apartment, the city lights twinkling outside my window like earthbound stars, and I am alone. But I am also whole, and I am building something that matters, something that will outlast me, something that makes the world incrementally better. That teenage girl standing on that Oregon beach, grieving for a dying planet, making impossible promises. She would be proud of me, and in the end, that's the only approval I really need. It's been 5 years since the divorce. My company now has offices in 3 cities and employs 47 people. We've expanded beyond corporate consulting to work with nonprofits and government agencies. We've helped dozens of organizations transform their operations. The impact is measurable, tangible, real. I'm in a relationship now, have been for 2 years. His name is Daniel, and he's a climate scientist. He understands the work because he does similar work. When I get excited about a breakthrough with a client, he gets excited too. When I have to travel for a conference, he doesn't pout or make me feel guilty. He says, "I'll miss you," and then tells me about the research project he'll be focused on while I'm gone. We celebrate each other's successes. We challenge each other intellectually. We've built a relationship based on mutual respect and shared purpose rather than complementary roles. It's not perfect. No relationship is. But it's built on a foundation that can support both of us growing, both of us reaching toward our own potential. Sometimes I wonder what Mark is doing. I heard he got married again to that kindergarten teacher. I heard they have a baby. I'm genuinely happy for him. I hope he found what he needed. Hope she's content in ways I never could have been. But mostly, I don't think about him. I'm too busy building the future I dreamed of. I'm too busy becoming, and that becoming, painful as it was to achieve, was worth everything I lost along the way.